Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
In the next several days to a week or so, we're going to continue to see things go up. We cannot be discouraged by that because the mitigation is actually working.
The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals. I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can.
Hi, it's Jonathan here. Welcome to this bonus episode. So far, we've gone into detail about the hidden agenda behind the pandemic. We've shared insights from our experts who have analyzed the data and revealed the truth about how COVID has been part of a much larger money-making and even population reduction scheme. The main goal has been to mandate ineffective and harmful strategies to scare the world into believing that COVID is extremely deadly and to make people believe that getting the COVID vax is the only way to survive the pandemic. This has ultimately led to people rushing to get these highly ineffective and dangerous vaccines, and Big Pharma have ended up with huge profits since they're completely absolved of any liability and from the adverse effects and deaths caused by the jab. So we want to know the truth about what's happening now, but the big question is, what are they planning next? Is this all a precursor to something bigger? Many believe that this is only Big Pharma's first step to gain control and power over the world. During this episode, one of our experts, Cvid, talks specifically about how the World Health Organization has been working on an international treaty on pandemics that aims to establish a one world government concept. He explains how this will have huge implications for our daily lives and affect our freedom of choice. We'll also hear from Dr. Brian Ardis as he discusses how the FDA is planning to extend authorizations so that they can give all newborns that are 6 months old to children who are 4 years old the Pfizer jab. He also talks about their plan to give 3 shots instead of 2 and urges parents to stand against this diabolical plan.
I appreciate you sharing some of the underpinnings there of how we relate as an entire world to those that are suffering and in poverty in our own countries and those abroad in other countries, because that so often gets taken out of the equation as if those people just didn't matter. And it is one of the greatest signs, the fact that there is so little empathy and love, because it's like we have to get very good at discerning what is love and what is counterfeit. It's interesting that the Bible talks about that. It compares counterfeit love to brass. It looks very similar to gold, but it's brass, and it is of no value comparatively. But this is just the hypocrisy that we face, and we see it so frequently, becomes normalized, but we need to rise above that and really think about that. You look at the history of nations, the rise and fall of nations throughout millennia has actually been in trend with how they treat their poor. When you see societies lack empathy and you see them disregard those that suffer in their communities, that's when you see them actually get overtaken by other neighboring societies, because they cease to be of any actual value, and they're too controlled by their indulgences and their own desires versed on standing and interest in right and what is best for others. This document, I know that your time is limited here. This document, I want to just open it up again with you just to navigate a few little pieces of it here. So this is it. So you've sampled it here for people to see. So Greenman Info, and people can find it. We'll just greenmaninfo.com, and then people can find it by going to, where do I go from here?
Right at the front page, if you scroll down there, you keep going. There it is, the second article. You just passed it, yeah.
Okay, awesome. There we go. All right, so now here you can see the document itself, and then people can go to the website there to see it. So some of the key points here, together with WHO Director General Dr. Tedros, we have proposed an international treaty on pandemics rooted in the WHO Constitution. We need to create an environment where every scientist, health worker, and government can band together for a common cause, working together to build new solutions and protect what is most precious, our health and our lives.
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds very good.
I would also just point out, this is the only, the second ever special session called, in the entire history of the WHO. So, this should be international headlines, right? This is a huge, huge deal. But there's a conspicuous silence, and we've all seen this happen during the pandemic, how they love to just go ahead and distract and create these very catastrophic scenarios and get the public's attention while other things are going on behind the scenes. Well, this is another example of that, and that's why it's on us to go ahead and take this very seriously and help share the information and raise awareness, because they're really trying to not get much attention on this right now.
Interesting. So they do it, but then not get too much attention. So it just goes forward, and then silence is complicit, is being complicit in it.
Well, here's an example, Jonathan, is like I was personally targeted, as you've seen in the past year and a half, as being one of the so-called disinformation dozen, right? So one of 12 people claimed to have been responsible for the majority of the misinformation about vaccines on social media, which of course it was later found out that was not true, and only 0.05% of vaccine-related content on Facebook was even linked to our accounts, and it wasn't even, quote, anti-vaccine. So it didn't matter. There was huge amounts of resources put into this psychological operation to make it seem as if I was, Satan incarnate, right? And so you can see that they have the power to push any agenda or narrative they want through the media. And the fact that this is one of the most important, most historical of all meetings to consolidate power and basically reconstruct the global governance system of the world around biosecurity being the only concern, really, at this point. Preempting all other concerns, all rights of all member nations. If there's a new variant declared, guess what? Lockdown. And this time, there's not going to be as much wiggle room. That's basically what they're saying. They want more power, more centralization, and more, it's more of an affirmation of the one world government concept. And that's happening right now before our eyes. So again, make note that the fact that there's almost no coverage on this indicates just how badly they want this to pass.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I just want to detail a couple of points here before you go. Historic move, 29th of November to 1st of December 2021. Okay, so as you were mentioning, it's the second time in history that they've met a second time in the same year, and that is to assess the benefits of developing a pandemic treaty, launch negotiations. Over 110 countries supported the decision to launch negotiations for a WHO Convention agreement or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. 3rd of March, so this is the date you're referring to, the Council of the European Union gives the green light to start negotiations for the conclusion of an international agreement on pandemics. So the fact that the European Union has agreed to this is certainly a very sad reality and something that we should be protesting against, correct? The fact that that step happened.
Yeah, well, once again, I mean, if we have any autonomy, any sovereignty as a nation, it's because we have things like the Constitution, and we have, principles related to basic human rights, like we believe in informed consent when it comes to medical decisions. But what's going to happen is that this international agreement, being that it's legally binding, will preempt those laws and rights associated with them. So that is what's at stake here. And again, it's extremely important that people know this and take action accordingly.
Yep. And then you've got, what are the potential benefits? Political engagement at leaders level and global inclusivity via a new legally binding agreement rooted in the WHO Constitution, improved equity in access to quality medical countermeasures, vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, PCR, fraudulent PCR tests, gene therapy, marketed as vaccines with zero testing or probably a lot of testing in previous years. And then rolled out to us, unsuspecting civilians. Establish principles, priorities, and targets to help countries better prepare for and respond to future pandemics. Sharing of monitoring data, genetic data, samples, technology, and their associated benefits. So, like, no doctor-patient confidentiality. You have this broadcasted, and they have power over you. Like, you could have some kind of information that you really don't want public to, they have the power over that, correct?
Right. There's no privacy, and that, that leads into this notion that, under the sort of like justification of early detection, or preemptive detection, that they may require some type of invasive, diagnostic technology. And so that's a big part of what's at stake here, is that, where's the boundary between the state and now this global supranational body and my own self? Like, is it my skin? Like, I don't know anymore, because if I want to go into, a Starbucks, right, I might need to show that I've been quadruple jabbed, and therefore, really, they can penetrate me. And it's required for me to even participate in, normal transactions in society. So this is really important that people realize that part of their plan here, which they're declaring very, very openly, is to focus on sharing of private medical data. There is going to be very little, if any, privacy allowed, because the idea here is, of course, if you sacrifice that, it's for the greater good. You're going to save grandma if you, share all your medical facts, and there's no privacy any longer, because that's the sort of notion, is that you don't deserve it, because you're being selfish, because that could put someone at risk. And that's the language they're trying to institutionalize as a default narrative that we navigate reality within. And now that doesn't work for me, because I believe in bodily sovereignty and responsibility for my own health, and I believe no one can penetrate my body without my consent. I mean, that's pretty clear. It works in the case of rape, right? Why can't it work in the case of medical realities? If the vaccines were bona fide, safe and effective, and that was proven, then it may be different, but that's not the case. They're experimental. There's no long-term safety trials. Their effectiveness is doubtful. And in fact, the argument has been made, especially recently with the Pfizer data coming out, that the risk of dying from or with COVID is far lower than the risk of dying from the vaccine. So obviously that narrative is hard to maintain.
Good call. No, thank you. Yeah, that information that recently came out from Pfizer is very damning. I just went through it with Dr. James Newen-Schwander last night, and it's good to have your commentary on that too. And I think in some of our closing thoughts here, the fact that you and Dr. Henry Ely, and we were just chatting about that earlier today through text, that the filing of that grand jury petition shows how these things progress. It goes from signatures, and then yes, we approach, and you're talking about sending this to all the lawmakers and to the president, but people will be like, well, what's that going to do? That's just going to go on deaf ears. But there's a process. Do you have any information to share on that process and plan of attack? Well,
it's a great example of what Dr. Ely and you recently participated in here, which is the filing for that federal grand jury investigation, that's now active, is that these things start off as simple as petitions, and then they actually have real world effects that are very profound. So don't underestimate the power of your intention and your micro actions in making a big difference in the world. This is a moment where, we have an opportunity to literally interface with the gears of history. I mean, right now, the juggernaut is locking in. They've made it very clear what their intention is. Again, this international treaty is legally binding, and it would preempt our nation's sovereignty and therefore your sovereignty and individual rights. So this is a time we have to step up. We have to make our voices heard, because decisions are being made for us, our children, future generations, and by staying silent, we are actually being complicit in many ways.
Thank you, Saya. And I think finally, the thought that really tacks onto what you're saying there is that, like, let's say, for example, the reason why Henry Ely, Dr. Ely, called me to say, hey, look, can you come out here to Portland? And from where I live, it was like a 12-hour flight. It was as if I was flying internationally. It was a 12-hour flight. And it was worth it for me being. The reason why it was worth it me being there is, regardless of whatever decisions these lawmakers make or however they come back, the fact that we're documenting their process is keeping accountability, and we're taking that to the public. And the reason why I'm explaining that is, oh no, but what if they just reject it? Well, what if they do reject it? what if that rejection or their silence on this issue after so many appeals and the process being followed, then they actually start to lose the trust of the public. Once the public's trust is lost in them and they no longer want to take their products in their body, there is no new health world order. That can't roll forward without people being in agreement with it. So we do seek to win the public domain argument, even though, we get maligned, but there's so much of the world stand with us because they see these breaches, and we just need to voice these truths stronger and clearer to have people come and boycott these systems. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that this is the moment. We're in it right now. We have a huge amount of opportunity to make a big difference for ourselves, for others, and it's simple. At this point, just go to Stand for Health Freedom, make your voice heard, and we will, I know we will have a huge impact. It's happened before, it's happening now, and it'll happen in the future. I mean, I really feel like people are waking up finally to what it really means to be free, to respect one's body, respect one's right to informed consent. It's very basic, actually, what we're talking about here. And now I think the public is, they're behind it. We're all behind this movement. So again, thank you for the opportunity to shed light on this, what's going on.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm honored to be a part of your amazing work, and it's just really heartwarming for me to know there's people like you out there doing this work and are interested in the future of humanity. There's not really many people like you out there, so thank you.
Well, I hope that's not true, but at least the people watching, I know we're in the same wavelength, and again.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks so much for watching this bonus episode. I'm so glad that we got to prepare this for you as well as the main episode. We just wanted to give you as much value as humanly possible. And it's just a tip of the iceberg for the value that you get inside of our program. We did all this for free. Like, no one, you're watching this, you didn't pay a cent to enjoy and learn from this. It was painstaking for the team and all working all through the night, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's not good for your health, but like we did it closer to the time that this was going live, just to make sure we were able to give you the best possible value, because we know that having the right information will save lives. And so it's a huge undertaking and commitment. And we've done all that for free. And so we want to let you know that inside of our program, when you support our mission and purchase any of our products here, the level of support and interest that you get, the level of excellence inside of our program is second to none. We're truly here to make a difference, and I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate your time, the fact that you're watching this. It makes me very happy, regardless of or not whether you support our mission in this way. We know that you're just here supporting us by watching and getting the message out in one way or another. So I just so appreciate you being here. Thank you for your consideration of owning our program. You can do that by clicking the buttons below to get started, and make sure if you're going to do that, do it before we close this series, because that's when it's available and that's when we're giving all those free gifts and the really great discounts as well. So make sure to secure that here today. Thanks so much. Dr. Artis, what's happening with the children under 5? What's that all about?
Yeah, great question. So February 15th, just a few days ago, the FDA was supposed to meet to discuss authorizing and extending the authorization to inject all newborns that are 6 months old to 4-year-olds to get the Pfizer shots. Now, in the clinical trials leading up to this meeting, they were finding supposedly that 2 shots that they were planning on approving for 6-month-old to 4-year-old children in America, they didn't see adequate data suggesting to them that they should actually push 2 shots, these lesser dosed shots than the adult shots for Pfizer. So what they did is they postponed the meeting for February 15th, and they haven't rescheduled it yet. However, this is not a good sign, because the FDA said they're postponing the meeting because there is an ongoing clinical trial with the Pfizer shots, and they believe that a 3rd shot will give them the data they're wanting. And if they see a robust, they consider antibody production from the 3-shot combo for Pfizer, they are then going to approve 3 COVID-19 Pfizer vaccines for all 6-month-old to 4-year-old children. So this is not a good thing. There should be none of these shots being given to children. They are the least group affected by cases for hospitalization of COVID-19 and the least to die from COVID-19 during this entire pandemic. So we have been warning families, parents, teachers, grandparents that the fact that they postponed this meeting does not in any way suggest that the FDA, out of the sincerity of their heart, are reconsidering the idea of vaccinating all children. You don't know this, but the American Medical Association, just a few weeks before February 15th, already has established the CPT codes for all pediatricians and medical doctors in this country, of the shot codes for giving shots to newborns 6-month-old to 4-year-old. So they are not going to roll this out. They are going to be bringing these COVID-19 shots to all children 6 months to 4 years old. They are now considering more data from a continued trial when they now are going to suggest 3 shots are needed to consider a 6-month-old to 4-year-old fully vaccinated. So please be warned, and please do not accept this emergency use authorization that the FDA will give to Pfizer. They will do it. There's nothing going to hold them back from doing it. They've just postponed it because they believe 3 shots is going to be better than 2.
Well, that's diabolical.
It is diabolical. Can I speak to that, by the way? The diabolical,
please.
the diabolical side of this is, just 3 months ago on November 8th, and we showed this on your first docuseries, the Circulation Journal, which is actually written by the American Heart Association, they published that the mRNA vaccines, they titled this publication a warning. They stated that the mRNA vaccines dramatically increase inflammation of the endothelium, or the lining of the heart, leading to increased blood clots, cardiomyopathy, and vascular events, including strokes and heart attacks, immediately following the mRNA vaccines. So the American Heart Association published that the mRNA shots, which is what Pfizer and Moderna are, that these shots are causing dramatic increases in blood clots, heart disease, and strokes. And this is what they're now pumping into all 5 to 11-year-old children in America. And now they're going to consider extending that actual use into 6-month-old to 4-year-olds. I can't think of anything more ridiculous than pumping a drug into children who it is a rarity for to have any blood clot disorders or heart disease, but they're going to authorize a shot that's already being published by the American Heart Association in November of 2021, that they are concerned and have published a warning that those shots dramatically increase heart disease and blood clot disorders. So yes, I have a lot of concerns for this. Parents should not consider this open or a reasonable idea to allow their children to get these shots, nor should anybody make any parents feel guilty for not doing so. This is definitely an experiment, and they should not be projecting it on any children of any age.
Absolutely, and you're speaking even within the narrative to talk about the experiment. We don't really know how long something like this has been planned for, whether the experiment has already completed, right? How do we know that this hasn't been developed over the last 20 years? We don't know. When everything is lies, then how do we not know? And then what if these experiments have been completed? They already know the end result, and that is that, you know, the worst case scenario, things like what Dr. Ben Marble says is it's a lethal injection, slow acting. I don't know. I tend to think that maybe that's overreaching still. I don't know though. That's the thing. What do you think?
Well, I will tell you from the American Heart Association Circulation Journal publication in November, they actually were able to confirm, and the reason why they published the warning is that the damage to heart muscle that they saw from the mRNA shots and the blood clot markers in the blood that were elevating, they saw these things persistent for over 2.5 months after the shots. So it wasn't alleviating, it wasn't correcting itself. They were seeing these same problems were persistent for at least 2.5 months at that point. So this is the major concern of theirs. I have the same.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing that. We're all going to need some counseling as we go through the next months to cope with what's going on and the kind of emotions that we're all having to experience. Like even just hearing all these things, and I have family members, that have children, and I won't go into detail, but I'm very, very concerned. I can't even believe this. It's like watching a genocide happen in front of my eyes, and people walking into the chambers, kind of thing.
Yeah. So now that we're on the topic of children, can I just continue that narrative?
Yeah, I'd love you to.
My own warnings to you.
Yeah, please. I want to hear them.
The FDA on January 21st, just a few weeks ago, January 21st, 2022, they just published an emergency use authorization paper that now authorizes one and only one drug to be the drug chosen to inject into the veins of all newborns in this country who are PCR tested for COVID-19. Do you know what drug that is, Jonathan Otto, that the FDA says?
Is it remdesivir?
It is remdesivir. They are now allowing all newborns that are 7 pounds or heavier in all pediatric ranges. They've now defined that remdesivir is the only authorized under an EUA, an emergency use authorization. It is now the only pediatric authorized treatment for COVID-19 for all pediatric ages. And they've authorized a 3-day dose of treatment for all ages in hospitals and out of hospitals. So this is my warning to all of you. Remdesivir is published. We know it causes acute kidney failure, liver failure, and heart failure in 5 to 10 days in adults. They now have just authorized this to be the only drug to be given to all newborns in hospitals. When your baby's born and they take it off to the nursery, hospitals are being incentivized to stick a cotton swab up your baby's nose, PCR test it using a fraudulent test, and if it comes back positive, they're going to be administering a 3-day dose of remdesivir into your baby's body. First thing everyone needs to know worldwide, on page 8 of this 42-page document, the very first thing on the top of that page is a bullet point, and it says that healthcare workers are required to make patients and caregivers and parents of children who test positive for COVID-19, all parents and guardians, it says, have the right to refuse remdesivir, otherwise known as the brand name Veklury, Veklury. So the most important thing everyone needs to know that they're going to be trying to pump remdesivir into your kids. It is a law under the EUA that you as a parent and as a caregiver have the right to refuse that treatment, and all of you, 100% of you, should. It further goes on to state that under this emergency use authorization, it requires that all doctors who are giving remdesivir to your baby, that if there is a serious adverse event, they are to report the serious adverse event to the FDA within 7 calendar days. Not 7 business days, 7 calendar days. And the document is called the FDA 3500 form. And then it lists the serious adverse events that every doctor needs to report to the FDA when they start pumping this drug into babies and to children. They list the first serious side effect is death can occur from remdesivir. The second is an increase or a hospitalization after being diagnosed and treated with remdesivir. The EUA is specific. It is allowing now babies, newborns, and children to be treated with remdesivir in hospitals or outside of hospitals. It's not just in hospitals. They can treat you outpatient, your children. So if they're going to give you remdesivir outside of the hospital and then your baby gets really sick and you have to take it to the hospital, this is supposed to be considered an emergency, a serious adverse event that is supposed to be reported to the government. And if your baby dies, they're required to report that under the treatment of remdesivir, and we need to be holding every doctor and healthcare practitioner, we need to hold them liable to this. So if anything happens to your loved ones being drugged with remdesivir, you make sure it's reported, because if it isn't, their license should be challenged. They should be turned to their state boards, and we need to start holding them complicit, because this is a very dangerous, toxic, lethal drug. They've gone after the elderly, like we've disclosed here in your docu-series, Jonathan. They've gone after the elderly. Now they're targeting the children with the same drug. Also, in this emergency use authorization, they're now authorizing remdesivir to be taken out of hospitals and being given to all the elderly in nursing homes around the country to shoot in the veins of people in nursing homes. And everyone needs to be warned, if you have a mom or dad or grandparent at a nursing home and they start showing respiratory distress or any symptoms, they are incentivized to diagnose them with COVID-19 and treat them with remdesivir, which is proven to cause acute kidney failure, liver failure, and heart failure in 5 to 10 days. So please, everyone, resist and say no. I asked Zev Zelenko a couple weeks ago in an interview, I said, how do we actually resist all of the efforts to create so much harm and death and carnage? And his answer was real humble and real sincere. He said, just say no. Tell everybody to say no. Say no to remdesivir. Say no to the vaccines. These are not beneficial. Their risks far outweigh their published benefits and their documented benefits. And if you want to know what those negative data points are, go back and watch the meeting that Jonathan Otto attended and took pictures of in Washington, D.C. with Senator Ron Johnson. Go watch the second opinion or the other opinion, whatever it was called there. They had a great meeting on January 24th in Washington, D.C. And they had some of the greatest individuals talking about all the serious concerns with all of the COVID-19 vaccines.
You got it right. Oh, thank you, Dr. Ardis. And now, reciting some of the facts that you shared with me before, Dr. Fauci was overseeing the study on remdesivir when chloroquine was being tested, not hydroxychloroquine, but chloroquine, which is of the same, and it was for a coronavirus. It wasn't COVID-19, it was an earlier coronavirus.
It was called SARS and MERS.
Yep. So for SARS and MERS, chloroquine was being used and remdesivir was being used, and remdesivir was the one that performed least effectively and was caused most organ failure and complications, whereas chloroquine was by far superior. Is that correct with the study?
Yeah, so there's a couple studies you're referencing. In 2005, when SARS and MERS, SARS was sudden acute respiratory syndrome. The same disease is called MERS when it occurred in the Middle East, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. This all occurred at the same time. They actually did a study to determine what stopped the infection process and disease process and transmission of SARS-CoV-1 in both SARS and MERS. Anthony Fauci and the NIH actually funded the whole study, and they found that hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, was the most effective at stopping the disease process if the people were infected, and it also stopped transmission of the virus as a whole. It killed it in 2005. That's how they stopped that whole pandemic and the scare of the pandemic. Now, Anthony Fauci knew that in 2005. In 2018 and 19, there was a study done against the Ebola virus in Africa. Remdesivir was in that trial, and Anthony Fauci and the NIAID department of the NIH funded that entire study. What they found was remdesivir compared to 3 monoclonal antibodies, actually. So there was 4 experimental drugs. The safety board found halfway through that 1-year study that there was only one of the 4 experimental drugs that killed over 50% of everyone they gave that drug to. And it was remdesivir. Remdesivir killed 53.1% of everyone they gave that drug to. Now, at the meeting you were at, Jonathan Otto, Dr. Merrick talked about how toxic remdesivir was. And when he started his talk, he said, Dr. Paul Merrick, he said that remdesivir was proven in that Ebola study to actually increase the risk of death by 3%. Now, it's interesting because he got that number because in the Ebola trial, 53% of people died taking remdesivir, when supposedly Ebola, the disease, kills 50% of all people that get the infection. That's where he got the 3% increase, was the difference between 53% with remdesivir and the supposed 50% of people with Ebola die. Okay? It was the only drug that had a higher death rate than the disease they were treating. However, Jonathan Otto, if Dr. Merrick would go back and look at the study, in the study, Anthony Fauci and those who funded the study, they actually used PCR tests to determine who was positive for Ebola, even if the people had no symptoms or disease. They even PCR tested pregnant women and put them in the trial. If a person PCR tested a female in Africa, they PCR tested positive for Ebola, and they had a newborn that was less than 7 days old, even if the baby tested negative PCR-wise for Ebola, but the mom tested positive, they enrolled the newborn, 1 day old to 7 day olds, into the trial to get remdesivir and to get any of the 3 monoclonal antibodies. That means there were no absolutes that individuals were actually diagnosed with true Ebola. They were using a fraudulent test called the PCR test that doesn't evaluate for Ebola anyway, or any respiratory viruses for that matter. But the fact that they included babies who did not have to test positive for Ebola or have any disease of Ebola tells you that the death rates were actually much higher than the 3% that Paul Merrick talked about. And I've been saying this nonstop. If you look into the study, they didn't include everybody who was actually positive for Ebola. They took anybody and just injected them or gave them remdesivir or any of those monoclonal antibodies. It was determined to be the least effective and the most deadly drug in that trial. And even now, 2 years later, Jonathan, I cannot believe that the FDA, the NIH, still published that remdesivir is the only authorized and approved drug for all hospitalized COVID-19 Americans, and now they're authorizing to give it to newborns, and it's the only authorized treatment for all pediatric age Americans, which is babies to 18-year-olds. They say that's the only one. And then in the same document, they say there are no alternative approved treatments for COVID-19 for pediatric age group.
There you go. Thank you for sharing that. That's very detailed. And so again, I always appreciate, Dr. Ardis, your attention to detail and how important that is right now, because the war will be won by truth and facts and honesty and discipline and diligence. The fact that we do the due diligence and we reflect on these things and we make our choices in that way. And these are all the shortcuts that were being made to get us into this position that would be willing to do this. Discarding very simple things like a double-blind placebo trial has been a age-old thing, or using anecdotal data to position facts to make it appear that we should vaccinate and the outcomes are better. All these types of things. Dr. Ardis, what else do you think would be some cutting edge issues to talk on that have unfolded between the last time we connected that you think would be valuable to this audience?
Yeah, well, I'm here in, where are we right now? In Ohio. We're in Canton, Ohio. And I actually just got up on stage today and and gave an entirely new presentation. The entire presentation actually was showing the audience in the world just how racist the CDC and the NIH has been in exploiting and targeting Black and Latino individuals in this country, trying to convince them that those two races are the most at risk for being hospitalized and dying from COVID. And they're also targeting Black individuals, trying to convince them in the media that Black male children are more susceptible to a multi-system inflammatory disease, Black males more than any other race, from getting SARS-CoV-2. And then I showed the world that in this research study that was funded by the NIH and published online on February 8th of this month, they actually said that Black males younger than 12 are most susceptible to getting this disease after getting COVID. The last paragraph in the article on MedPage Today, it actually states that the head researcher for the group on that study said that they had no definitive information to be able to say whether or not the kids ended up in the hospital and had COVID or not. But the actual first sentence of the study says, after getting SARS-CoV-2, there are specific demographics of children who are at higher risk to developing this disease. But the last paragraph states they cannot be definitive, they don't have any definitive information to say whether or not the kids ended up in the hospital because of COVID or for any other reason. And then I showed that this was funded by the NIH, and then I showed this condition on the CDC's website, and it actually shows you which races, Jonathan, which races of children are actually developing MIS-C more often than any other race. And it actually has the bar graph on cdc.gov, and it has a sentence right above the bar graph, and it states, it says, right now, the most at-risk race for acquiring MIS-C is Black and Latinos. And the bar graph, I just showed it to the whole audience. I said, look, they're telling you it's Black and Hispanics are the biggest race affected by this condition. But the bar graph doesn't show that. It actually shows that white children have more MIS-C than Black and Hispanics. And it's the same screenshot. It's the same chart with the sentence at the top of it. And I made sure the world knows that they're actually trying to scare Hispanics and Blacks into getting these vaccines by convincing you children are at high risk for this terrible inflammatory condition that, by the way, is actually an advertised, published side effect of the Pfizer and Moderna shots, per the FDA's document before the shots ever came out. On October 22nd, 2020, the FDA listed this condition called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children as a published side effect of the coming Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson shots. They already knew that was going to happen to children. But the fact that it happens more to white children, but that's not what they're telling you in the media, tells you there's a eugenics effort in place to target the races of Black and Latinos and lie to them so that, because they don't think they're going to go look at the data. Well, I made sure I showed all the data that not only are the white race the most hospitalized for COVID-19 by far, and have the highest death totals by far from COVID-19 in America. I had to show these lies because that's not what the media is telling you. The NIH isn't saying it, the CDC's not saying it, but it's their own data. They are trying to convince a group of people who are already hesitant and do not trust the government to experiment on them for good reason. Everyone needs to know about the Tuskegee experiments against the African Americans. There is no doubt they're going to question and be hesitant to get these vaccines from the government that are telling them they have to. They have every right to be hesitant, and they should, because the government's using the media and their own statistics to lie to you and convince you otherwise. They are not the most threatened. Do not believe the hype. It's all a lie. It's all a setup. And when I did the grand jury, I don't know if you noticed, but Dr. Rainier Fulmick is doing a grand jury right now worldwide. Their third grand jury hearing, the third day, was over medical malpractice, and I was asked on Sunday to be the doctor to start the medical malpractice around COVID-19. At the end of my 1-hour presentation of research and documents about how they're killing people around the world using drugs in hospitals and in nursing homes in multiple countries, and sedative drugs to sedate people and kill them, at the end of it, the actual judge asked me, he said, Dr. Artis, is it your opinion that they are actually putting all these protocols in place to cause massive amounts of death and injury? And my answer is this. I actually said it verbatim. This is textbook eugenics, Your Honor. And it is. There is a superior group of individuals who believe there are other groups of people that are inferior and do not belong. And they have for decades, millennia probably, they have targeted these individuals with an attempt to wipe them out, target them, single them out, and judge them, discriminate against them. And they're doing it right now in all aspects of COVID as well. Blacks and Hispanics are not at higher risk than white people are. Do not believe that hype. You're all at risk for them being able to attempt to kill you and murder you with all of these drugs. They just happen to be the two races that are the most hesitant and distrusting. And they should be. And they should continue to be that way. And that was my warning for all of them right now.
Wow, it's like the truth is hidden in plain sight. They are at risk. They are potentially at most risk right now because the crosshair is on them. And so it's not because the disease is more likely to kill you, it's because we're going after you and we're propagandizing you right now. So we're actually telling you the truth. You are the most at risk right now. But it's absolutely uncanny. And I appreciate you speaking specifically like that to the judge so that it doesn't get caught in, oh, well, if only they would run some better tests on this, and if only they would perfect the vaccine. And it gets us barking up the wrong tree. You have to discern black from white. And I'm not talking about skin color. I'm talking about color, or I'm talking about being able to distinguish what is genocide, what is not, because otherwise we're going to continue to get trapped in different circumstances and we're not going to respond appropriately. So that's very insightful. Thank you for that. Just hearing about the FDA and the WHO's current plans to gain control and strip the human race of their autonomy is chilling. Our experts have made it clear that the only way to fight against their evil agendas is to stand together and share the truth. We need to be constantly questioning their mandates and to look for the truth and the real science to expose their intent to cause direct harm. Our final speaker is Joshua Yoder, who's a pilot who started advocating against the mandated vaccines that have been causing serious injuries and deaths. especially for pilots. He talks about how it's important to stand against tyranny because if we don't, there's no end to what the government or these companies can and will do. It's a privilege to chat with you, Josh, and to get to understand the work that you've been doing, because you're standing for such an important aspect of the future of humanity. Travel is a huge part of everything that matters to us. Like, for example, like the Great Berlin Wall was so traumatizing because it separated families, and travel separates people. So it's not like we're all just talking about luxury trips that we want to do here. We're talking about families being together, and you've been standing at the forefront of this issue and been brave and courageous. So deeply commend the work that you've been doing, and I'm grateful that you're doing it because it matters to me, because now this is close to home for me and everyone I know and care about. So thank you for your work.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. So Josh, you are a pilot. Why don't you tell me about your background? How did you, what's been your professional experience? And then let's chat about the issues that started to unfold for you.
Sure. I have a military background. I was a flight medic in the Army, multiple combat tours. Spent multiple years overseas after that, Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa. During that time, I became a pilot. Went to Africa for a couple of years. I was a bush pilot there. I saw tyranny for what it is there, in Somalia and places like the Congo and South Sudan, where it's really severe. And that kind of gave me a passion. It really gave me a passion for the freedom movement. I came back here, I became an airline pilot. Flew for the regional airlines for a few years. Now I fly for a major U.S. airline here in the United States. And it's been really rough, seeing what these mandates are doing to employees. These airlines and the federal government, they're destroying people's lives. And we've had suicides, we've had people die from vaccine injuries. Lots of people being coerced into doing something that they don't believe in, and that's what led to the founding of U.S. Freedom Flyers.
Awesome, and I appreciate so much that we would chat about that. And with your background and experience, you're certainly somebody that people would see as someone that cares about your country and cares about you have a big purpose and mission, versus somebody that just likes to be against something for no real cause. Like I think you're a patriot from what I gather, in the sense that you've served overseas in combat, and now you've had to do something that maybe makes you look not so good or not so patriotic in the public eye to certain people that don't understand the issues here. What is that something? Was there a war at all for you in working out, like, how do I understand this? Am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing by my country? When even presidents and elected government officials are saying that this work that you're doing is not a good thing. So how would you respond to that?
Well, for me, what I'm ultimately against is tyranny. The government or a company doesn't have the right to tell an individual what to do with their body. If we don't stand up and say no right now and stop this, there's no end to what the government or these companies can do. If they can force us to put a vaccine in our body that we disagree with for whatever reason, whether it be medical or religious, there is no end to it. What are they going to do next? Like regulate our BMI? Tell us, what medications we have access to, what we can put in our body, what we can't. It's a very slippery slope, and we've seen this country losing our freedom since post 9/11, starting specifically with the Patriot Act, and it's been a subtle thing, for quite some years since then. But right now we're seeing our freedoms just being eroded at such a rapid rate, and it's up to us to stop it. If we don't all stand up as Americans and stand together, we're going to lose this country, and that's not something that I'm willing to do. Wow,
and. Okay, so truly it sounds to me like these are situations where the pain point is so strong, the pain of being silent, then is a compulsion to do what we stand for. Or on the other side, it's just a love for what makes this country great and what makes life beautiful and enjoyable, freedoms, the ability to enjoy beautiful experiences in life versus to be monitored and told everything you can and can't do. That whole paradigm when if you are completely controlled, you're neither capable of love or of evil, because you are simply in the hands of the puppeteers, if that were possible, and so you'd be neither capable of good nor evil, but then because you'd be open to that, people's that agenda, then you could be a force for evil. So, like there is a huge need to stand for the truths and freedoms that make this that make life beautiful. What do you think, Josh? Let's talk about some of the situations that unfolded for people that you know. You're a pilot. Is this an issue for other pilots with mandates, with vaccinations, flight hosts and hostesses? Can you tell me about that issue?
Sure, this is a problem for all airline employees, and we're not just airlines now. We're encompassing the entire transportation sector. So we have trucking companies, rail companies have joined us, even companies like Boeing. Large companies that are involved in any way in the transportation sector are joining us to push back against the mandates. What I saw was that people's lives were being ruined. They were being coerced by the companies, forced to do something that they didn't believe in. And what we believe at U.S. Freedom Flyers is that coercion starts at the top with the federal government, which is why we're currently suing the federal government. We're suing Joe Biden, specifically on behalf of the federal mandate. That's what most of these airlines and these large companies are hiding behind, the fact that they have federal contracts. And so, the government came in and said anyone with a federal contract is mandated to get the vaccine. And, just the personal stories that I'm seeing at the airlines, at my airline as well as the other 26 that we represent in these other companies, I'm familiar with deaths that have happened, people that have gone out and got vaccinated because they felt they didn't have a choice. Even though there's an exemption process in place, some people weren't aware of that. Most recently, I'm aware of a pilot at American Airlines. His name was Will Wolf. He was a captain from Phoenix. He didn't realize all the options that were available to him, and he didn't want to get vaccinated, but he went out and did it, believing that he had to be vaccinated by November 24th. A few days later, he got sick, he ended up in the hospital, he had a seizure, and then he died of a brain hemorrhage. And now he's left behind a family, a wife and children and grandchildren, including a pregnant daughter. This is devastating. These are the effects. That's just one of the personal stories that's happened. I'm aware of flight attendants and other people who have gotten vaccinated and they've become paralyzed. One of them from the neck down. And this is severe. It's ruining people's lives. No person should ever have to choose between their livelihood and taking an experimental medication that they don't agree with. And unlike what the companies and the government are telling us, there is no approved vaccine in the United States. A judge just ruled here a few days ago that Cvid and Pfizer cannot be interchangeable. So there is no approved vaccine in the United States currently, and the government and the companies are lying to us.
Okay, so you're saying with Cvid and Pfizer cannot be interchangeable?
That's correct.
So it's not the actual same thing?
No, it's not. A judge ruled that they cannot be interchanged. Cvid is the only approved drug, and it does not exist in the United States. And
how is it that they tried to present that Cvid is Pfizer? How did they try to get us in on this? It appeared that it was. So what's that all about?
It appeared that it was, and the reason that they put that out is because they're trying to coerce people. It's actually illegal for a company or a government to mandate that you take a medication that's under emergency use authorization, which is why they tried to tell everyone that it was approved. So what they did is completely illegal. It's in violation of Nuremberg Code as well as federal law. These people who are forcing this can actually be held accountable.
I appreciate you sharing that. And with the cases of all of these injuries, there must be a state of multiple feelings going on within your colleagues and the kind of pilot and flight travel community. The people that work in these fields. Do you see a mixed response? Do you see that a lot of people in the same situation as you, that you feel that you are not willing to put these things into your body? What's your what's your vision of the whole thing right now?
Well, many of us are standing up against it, against getting the vaccine, and many of those who have been vaccinated are standing with us against the mandates. This isn't political, and it's not pro or anti-vaccine. This is pro-freedom, and we don't believe that the government or a company has the ability to tell us what we're going to put in our bodies. So that's really the core issue here. It's a freedom issue. And another thing that's been happening is pilots that have been getting vaccinated. I've been made aware of multiple cases of pilots who are having adverse reactions, and they're afraid to seek medical help because everything that we do depends on our flight physical. And if we can't pass our flight physical, we lose our career. So this is essentially putting people in a position where they may potentially fly with adverse reactions and not get medical help, which could certainly endanger them and the passengers, depending on the severity of the injury.
And speaking explicitly, what are the possibilities of what could happen?
Well, the worst could happen. We know about the deaths. I receive reports quite frequently, actually, of deaths and injuries. In aircraft, we have two pilots, at the airlines. But even losing if you lose a pilot in flight, due to the published side effects. If you look at the Pfizer vaccine, the documents that were just released here about a week and a half ago, right in the side effects, it lists blood clots, stroke, sudden death, myocarditis. These are severe issues. And the FAA never did their own study to make sure that this was safe. They just rubber stamped the vaccine going off of what the FDA and the CDC told them. And the FAA has never done this in the past. For instance, years ago, you used to be forced to retire at the age of 60, and then they moved the retirement age to 65. For what I believe was a 7-year period, pilots between the ages of 60 and 65 couldn't fly together because they were studying the safety of allowing a pilot who was 5 years older than the previous age, to fly together in the same flight deck. So if the FAA was that focused on safety then, why are they not placing the same focus on the safety of this vaccine? It's unconscionable what they're doing, and I believe that time will tell that it was a very poor choice.
I appreciate you sharing that. And coming back to this issue of what could happen, so if a pilot is having an adverse reaction during a flight, what do you see as the possibilities of the things that could happen in that event? Sure,
it's just been in the news recently. I believe it was a WestJet flight in Canada where the first officer, if I'm remembering correctly, died while in flight, and they had to divert. So that obviously affects the safety of the flight. I'm aware of another incident here in the United States where a first officer passed out. I don't know whether he was vaccinated or unvaccinated. What I do know about the Canadian flight is that all Canadian pilots are currently vaccinated. They're unable to fly up there if they're unvaccinated. So we can, whether that's what it was from, I can't say that for sure. But, going back to the side effects that are listed on the Pfizer documents, it would seem to suggest that that's a high probability.
Got it. And what would you say to somebody, okay, and so on that, is it possible that a plane could crash and go down?
It's possible. I don't want to stand here and say that it's not safe for you to fly. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to look at the worst possible scenario. As pilots, we put a lot of time into thinking about the safety of our flight and how to mitigate risk. By just going out and getting an experimental vaccine, that's not good risk management.
Yeah, true. Because basically, as I understand it, you have two pilots in the cockpit, correct? And that if one has a problem, the other is there ready. So if both had a problem at the same time, that would be
that would be catastrophic should that happen. It might, the chances of that happening are probably slim, but it could happen.
Yeah.
And if it does happen, it would be catastrophic.
Yeah, and then on top of that, having one pilot go down, the other half, have something that incapacitates them or makes them unable to fly, so the other has to take over. That would be seen as a very large risk for the passengers. Is that correct?
It would be a very major event. One pilot can fly the airplane and get it on the ground, but that, however, it does affect safety. There's two of us there for a reason, and when you take one out of the equation, it's certainly not as safe as having two.
Got it. And then for a long flight, let's say Australia to the US, it's a 14-hour flight. So the likelihood would increase how long the flight is for two pilots to go down. Would that be fair?
Certainly. The more time you add to the equation, the more the higher the probability. Yeah. But the bigger issue there as well is you have these long flights, and the more inactive you are, we're already prone to blood clots, and especially on long flights. And so now you add a vaccine to the mix where a known side effect is blood clotting. So think about that. You're sitting for the most of 14 hours. You've dramatically increased your side effect risk in regard to blood clots and strokes.
Because you're sitting for that prolonged period of time?
Sitting for that period of time at cabin altitudes of around 8,000 feet, which makes pilots already more susceptible to those types of issues.
That's a very good point. And again, increasing the likelihood of an event of danger to the passengers. Now, what would you say to someone that was saying, well, listen, Josh, getting COVID is also a risk, and imagining that the vaccine did help people with COVID, would the risk not be greater to not get vaccinated? Imagining if it were true, and then to fly the plane, versus to get the shot, for people that see it that way.
Right. Well, specifically for pilots, I'm not aware of anyone who's gotten COVID and died who died a sudden death. So that's what we're talking about here, is like a sudden death or sudden onset versus an illness that could potentially kill you. And also the airlines in 2020, they paid for a peer-reviewed Harvard study. And that Harvard study says that an aircraft is the safest place to be. Your risk of contracting COVID is 0.003%. This is their own data. They paid for, peer review from Harvard. So, during 2020, when there were no passengers, they were telling everyone, hey, the airlines, it's the safest place that you could be. You're not going to contract COVID on an airplane. But now suddenly, and we're in 2021, and what's changed? I think what's changed is the fact that they're receiving coercion from the federal government. And have been no major or no COVID outbreaks linked to airline travel to date.
We're at the end of our episode, and we've unpacked a lot of information in terms of what Big Pharma and the authorities have up their sleeves. The reality is that the COVID-19 pandemic is just a trial run, and the more they realize that they can gain control through fear-mongering, the more they'll continue to carry out their larger plan. We need to rely on the truth and look at the real facts. We need to question what the media is saying and pay attention to experts like Cvid, who have been analyzing Big Pharma and the government's actions for a while now. Many experts had predicted that a pandemic like this would come. They continue to analyze trends in Big Pharma and the WHO and the CDC and the FDA's movements, as well as the governments, to predict what they've got planned next. By being aware of the truth and staying on top of current developments puts us in a better position to plan our response to their future agendas. This means that we'll be more aware of the role that the media plays in creating fear to get us to conform, and we'll know what to do to stand up for our rights. Thanks so much for watching this episode. It was such a pleasure to create it for you. Just a reminder that we're getting closer to closing down our program, so make sure to place your order for the silver or the gold package of COVID secrets before we close this down. So thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.